M1. The Story of Jazz.
Jazz is a type of music that was born in America. It has its roots in music styles that were around near the end of the 19th century. However, its own unique music style did not begin to develop until the 20th century. It is now popular around the world. Jazz was created from a combination of various music styles. It has a very different mood from other types of music. It has the kind of beat that when you listen to it, you can feel the pain and joy of human life. Modern pop and rock music has been greatly influenced by jazz. Usually, musicians play a piece of music exactly the way it was written by the composer. They may also play a piece the way they think the composer would have enjoyed to have heard it played. Jazz is quite different. Improvisation is highly respected in jazz music and highlights the talents of the musician. With jazz, musicians aim to be original, and therefore the music played often depends more on the mood of the audience. Jazz musicians like to create new interpretations of music by experimenting with the melody, the harmony, and even the timing. The instruments used by early jazz players were not that special. In fact, they were the same as those played by other bands at the beginning of the 20th century. Key sounds in jazz music come from the clarinet, saxophone, cornet, trumpet, and other brass instruments. These are blended with the sounds of the drums, piano, double bass, and many other instruments to create diverse and interesting rhythms. However, the beginnings of jazz can be traced back to Africa. African music has always made good use of tribal drums, as well as harp-like instruments. Jazz grew out of hymns, spirituals, and black slave songs. Later, the influences of gospel and blues music, as well as European influences, led to the jazz styles we hear today. The popularity of jazz spread as small bands of musicians traveled around the country and played to new audiences. Along with this, an increase in opportunities for children to develop their musical talents at some schools led to an increase in the number of formally trained musicians. Many of them were influenced by the rhythms of jazz. Although jazz was born in America, it is European audiences that have often really appreciated its unique improvisational rhythms. Many American jazz musicians have moved from the United States and made their home in cities such as Berlin, London, and Paris. There they have further developed the sounds of jazz, which helped jazz to become popular in other cities and countries too. Today, there are many different jazz festivals held around the world. This worldwide popularity of jazz is due to the music being about the expression of feelings. But jazz has not always been appreciated. In the early days, jazz was not very popular because many people connected the music with loose morals and low social status. Also, many of the musicians were black, and at that time there was a lot of racial prejudice in the United States. Once white orchestras started to adapt and imitate jazz, people's attitudes were quick to change. By the late 1930s, Benny Goodman led a racially mixed group and appeared in concert at places such as Carnegie Hall in New York. Carnegie Hall is one of the most famous concert halls in the world. Now, people more commonly enjoy jazz at clubs or in restaurants. The U.S. city of New Orleans has long been famous for jazz. During the 18th and 19th centuries, it was not common for slaves to have much freedom to do anything outside of their master's property. However, in New Orleans, black slaves were allowed to play their native music in public. They would mainly play their music in an area that was then known as Congo Square. At that time, New Orleans had many educated and influential Creole people, as well as many free black people. experienced musicians picked up those African beats and rhythms. They were later mixed by musicians with the sounds of European and Latin American music, which contributed to the development of jazz. Many U.S. jazz bands became famous. Some of the musicians were extremely talented, as they also knew how to play European classical music. Jazz blends many styles of music, and that is why it is loved in so many countries around the world. One of the world's most famous jazz musicians was Louis Armstrong, who was also known as Satchmo. He was born into a poor family in New Orleans in 1901 and died in 1971. One day, a Russian Jewish immigrant lent Louis some money so that he could buy a cornet, which was the beginning of his musical career. Louis Armstrong first became famous as a cornet player. Later on in his career, he began to play the trumpet and also to sing. His career developed as he played in many bands and traveled around the U.S. While playing in these bands, he became well known for his unique style and solos. During his career, he recorded music with bands, famous blues singers, famous musicians, and also as a solo artist. His talents also extended to being in musicals and movies. Throughout his long career, Louis Armstrong also had many opportunities to travel overseas and play his music. He became a symbol of jazz and has influenced jazz musicians for many generations. In New Orleans, probably the most famous place to enjoy jazz music is Bourbon Street. It is located in an area called the French Quarter. It lies not far away from the Mississippi River. Bourbon Street is home to many clubs, restaurants, and souvenir stores. You can see musicians playing music on the street and also enjoy live music in the clubs or while enjoying a meal in a restaurant. Many people go to sample the delights of New Orleans musical culture. Whenever you visit New Orleans, you can hear the sound of beautiful jazz music.